Whew, seems like it's about time for me to kind of get back into debunking some fascist rhetoric, and in particular, there's a phrase that was made up by transphobes a while back that I've recently seen a bit of an uptick, I think, in kind of innocent bystanders using, where transphobes took the two real phrases, gender dysphoria and body dysmorphia, and kind of smash them into each other to create a nonsense term, gender dysmorphia, which is not a real thing, and it kind of it's really kind of going out of the way to make trans people seem incorrect when trans people are actually correct. So let's take a look at what the difference is between those two things and why you don't really want to mix them up. So let's start with body dysmorphia, the one I know the least about, so this is going to be a very quick one. This is when you have a real or imagined flaw with your body. It doesn't really matter if it's real or not, you just perceive it. I'm going to my ear here because I actually do have keloids, but that's something I don't think about every day. It's something I only think about, when I go out and it's cold and I wonder why my ear suddenly hurts. So what happens with the body dysmorphia is quite different from that. It's when you're constantly thinking about it, you're ruminating on it, obsessing over it every day. It's getting in the way of your daily activities. And really, if anything, this actually reminds me of those incels and how they inevitably eventually get out the calipers and start measuring their skulls and how they think they don't match up to like real men's skulls and all that nonsense. And if you externalize that and start applying it to other people, that looks an awful lot like what transphobes do with their transvestigations and how they look into women in women's sports, and if they do too well they start thinking, oh, maybe she's secretly a man. And they also think that about Michelle Obama for some reason, because it's not enough to be transphobic, you have to be racist on top of that, because of course they do. So that's the kind of gist with body dysmorphia. It's when you don't have a real significant issue with your body, but because you perceive it as such and you obsess over it, it's more like an OCD thing, really. You're just kind of thinking about it all the time. And this is not at all related to having an actual, real, legitimate grievance with your body, which we'll look at next. So, what's gender dysphoria? This one I know about. That's when you're really depressed because your innate sense of gender, of who you are, doesn't match up with your body. So, first, let's look at cis endosex people, which is to say people who are not transgender and who are not intersex. Okay. Say you're down the pub, you're with your friend Bob, and you offer him an estrogen pill so he can grow breasts. He will not take it. Or you talk to your friend Alice, you offer her a shot of testosterone, an injection in this country because I'm not American, and you say, hey, this will put hair on your chest. She will not take it. Why not? Because generally speaking, guys do not like having gynecomastia. They don't like the idea of having breasts. This repels them because they're guys. That's kind of the definition. Women do not like the idea of having facial hair or body hair or a deep voice. Why would you? This is all kind of pretty much, the definition of being a man is not wanting to, be a woman, feeling that's not who you are, and vice versa. If you're a woman, by definition, you do not want to have, a male body. That will be weird and icky, no end. So, I think a lot of people kind of instinctually are aware of this. They don't really articulate it, but most people, I think, do have a sense of what sex their body ought to be, and they really, really do not want to change it into something that it shouldn't be. If a guy does have gynecomastia, there's no kind of waiting period, and then a doctor will insist you see like 2 psychiatrists to prove you're really sure you don't want breasts and you haven't thought it through because your body's naturally beautiful as it is. No, that will just get rid of the breasts because you're a guy and you shouldn't have them. And similarly, if you're a woman with hirsutism and you have say facial hair, body hair, you're not going to like that. Being a woman, I don't think it's really stereotypical of me to say that most women do not want to have a deep voice, facial hair, body hair. That's not really a stereotype. That's just women do not want these things. That's kind of incongruous with your body image. So when that happens, again, doctors will intervene. They're not going to insist you make sure you don't really want to have a deep voice and facial hair and body hair. They're not going to insist that you live with it for a few years first, just to make sure, just to try it out. No, they'll be like, okay, this is clearly, medically your body should not be doing this. We'll get you an estrogen, we'll get you an anti-androgens, we'll sort the problem out. And so this is the kind of thing where it used to look like doctors had your best interests at heart and they're just trying to make sure you're happy and healthy. But I now realise it's really a lot more about normalisation and getting you to conform to everyone else in society, because I have since learnt how they treat other people. Say with intersex people, for instance, I think still to this day it seems, which is really bad on their part, but doctors will still basically just flip a coin and think, oh well, yeah, you're kind of in between two sexes, so we'll just go with this one. This one's kind of easiest to surgically get to. They won't ask you, what your gender is. They won't wait for you to articulate it and tell them. They won't wait until you're an adult. They'll just give you surgery without your consent, and they'll give you hormones while not telling you what they're for. And there's like a 50-50 chance that they're going to artificially make you transgender when you naturally were not, because they're going to decide for you what they think your gender ought to be, and they're not going to wait around for you to tell them whether they're right or not. They're just going to take a guess and assume that it works. And we now know that's not actually how it works. And you think, well, at least for cis people, everyone realises it would be deeply unethical to force someone to cross-dress and take the wrong hormones. Well, that actually did happen. There's this guy who had, there's a botched circumcision performed on him, and so they tried to convince him he was a girl, got him to dress as a girl, gave him estrogen to grow breasts when he was a teenager, and this is sold as a roaring success story, like, yeah, you can just make up what gender you think someone is and they'll go along with it and they'll be none the wiser. And this was not at all the case. Sure, he didn't remember what happened to him, but he did have an innate sense that he was a guy, he should be a guy, he should have a deep voice and facial hair and body hair and a penis and all of that. And so he did not like it when he was forced to wear dresses. He actively fought against that. And he, didn't like growing breasts. He actively, I don't think he could articulate it because he couldn't tell that people were forcing him to take these, vitamins. But he was deeply, deeply unhappy. And in the end, after this was sold as a success story, he changed back, because of course he did. He had an innate sense that he was a man, and so after they basically artificially made him transgender, naturally he transitioned back to a man and then killed himself. And this was a very serious thing. It was a tragedy, and I'm pretty sure that cis people realised that was a tragedy. Like in the whole, okay, they shouldn't have done that. But I think there's this issue where people think the mistake was in actively doing something instead of passively doing something, was really the actual mistake was going against the wishes of the consenting mind and acting like the body is more important than the mind, which it isn't. My gist here is trans people, as the science has borne out many, many times, are exactly who they claim they are. And if you have empathy for most people, not being forced to cross-dress and socialise as if they're the opposite sex, and not being forced, to change hormones, if you're against that because, it's cruel and unusual punishment, it's torture, of course you're against it, please extend that empathy to trans people and to intersex people, and don't demand that they have to pretend to be someone they're not, even though it makes them deeply unhappy and suicidal, just because that makes you more comfortable, because you don't have to think about how bodies are malleable, and don't have to confront, you could just as easily be the opposite sex when you're not. You don't need to worry about that. You would know if you were transgender, pretty sure. You'd be thinking about it a bit. Incidentally, the behavioural psychologist type scientists who did this stuff, with David Reimer forcing him to pretend to be a girl when he wasn't, the same kind of people, it's the same school of thought here, Now you can see, like, them teaching each other, and it all comes down from the same exact, literally same people. The gay conversion therapy, that's another case where it's clearly not in the interests of someone to force them to pretend to be someone they're not. Nevertheless, they're going against the health and happiness of people, and they're torturing them into conforming to pretend to be someone they're not. Same with ABA for autistic people. They're taking people who are naturally, I might add, quite happy and healthy, and they're forcing them to pretend to be people they're not, and this is traumatic, and they're giving them PTSD, and they come up with a whole bunch of trauma-related issues as adults as a result. And if you can have empathy for all of these people, please extend it to minorities. Please extend it to disabled people and intersex people and trans people who also, should not have to be tortured, which really, really should go without saying. Just, please extend your empathy to minorities is all I'm getting at here. So, thank you. Okay, so now we know what body dysmorphia is, we know what gender dysphoria is, let's see what gender dysmorphia is. Well, it's nothing, it doesn't exist, they've made it up, it's just a nonsense made up phrase by transphobes. They're just mashed together two completely different concepts. And you know why they did it? In order to pretend that the very real thing that trans people feel, where they don't want to be forced to cross-dress and they don't want to be forced on the wrong hormones, just like no one wants those things, they're trying to pretend that that's like a kind of illegitimate urge, like it's an obsession about a perceived flaw that doesn't exist, like in body dysmorphia. So they're just trying to conflate two completely different things in order to pretend they're the same when they're not. And how do they do this? Well, they rather cunningly noticed, woo, these two words sound a bit similar. They begin with dis and end in ear. Therefore, to people who haven't really heard much of either phrase, will just pretend that that's what the actual phrase is, and they'll conflate the two. And don't feel bad if you've been duped, okay? They're going out of their way to dupe people. They're hucksters, they're going to huckst. So don't worry about if you've been using a nonsense phrase all this time. Just, now you know better, please use the actual phrase gender dysphoria when that's what you mean. Although really, I'm not even sure we need a phrase for that. No one likes it when they're forced to be on the wrong hormones or forced to cross-dress. I didn't like it when I was 2, and I think it's safe to say that, light's gone. And I think it's safe to say that, that's not due to stereotypes or anything. That's just people like to fit in with their peers, which is people of the same gender, the same age and everything. These days I don't fit in with my peers so much, but that's due to autism. That's a different thing entirely. Anyway, thank you very much for sticking with me and watching the whole thing. Sticking with me throughout the whole thing like the light didn't. And thank you very much to my sponsors as well. And hopefully next time I'll be, talking to you about something like music making, the fun, synthesizers. We like that. Yeah, it's way more interesting. Rather than having to just kind of, push back against this fascist rhetoric. It's not, been the best year. But yeah, please, have empathy for minorities. That's all I'm asking anyone. So thank you, and see you next time. Bye. Ooh, geese time. We like geese. Right, so